You could say that 12 Monkeys is Terry Gilliam's most normal film, except there's nothing very normal about it. But in terms of production, it was intended to be a normal film. And that was really important for Terry, I think, at that moment in his career, because he had developed a reputation for being a wild man, out of control. I mean, of course, that came largely from the great Munchausen affair, the film that was supposed to have got out of hand, over budget, uncontrollable, etc. He tells a different story about that, but in industry terms, he was seen as a director that was very difficult to control and really dangerous to tangle with. So he was very determined to prove that he actually was a responsible, responsive director. And he had a reason for doing that. He wanted to get studio backing for projects that he really wanted to make. The Defective Detective, for instance, was a project he carried around for a long time. And the issue always was, well, you know, would you back it? You've got a reputation for being hard to handle. So I think the truth about both Fisher King and 12 Monkeys is that these were films where Terry was determined to be on his best behavior. He knew that there was a lot riding on these films, and it was really important that they were controlled. However crazy some of their elements were, they had to be delivered on time and on budget. He'd done pretty well with Fisher King. Fisher King had come in really successfully on budget and did very well at the box office. So he was well set for the next project as this kind of recovery process. It's a little bit like Scorsese, for instance, after Raging Bull, and particularly after King of Comedy. He had developed a reputation for being hard to control and a bit out of control himself, and that's why he did After Hours. After Hours was his recovery film, as he described it. And I think you could say that with Terry Gilliam, in a sense, 12 Monkeys was very much a stabilization film, a film to show that he was, you know, really responsible and could be entrusted with quite large budgets. Having said that, the actual budget for 12 Monkeys was not so very high. It was, I think, 29.5 million, which was not the highest of that period by any means. And they found themselves struggling to contain the film within that budget, but he was determined that they would stick to it. There's a kind of backstory about how the script came to him. It had been around many people. It was written by David and Janet Peoples. It's inspired by a very famous short film by Chris Marker called La Jetée, a fascinating little film made almost entirely of stills, a kind of science fiction, a conceptual science fiction film about a man who is projected back from the future to the present to warn about impending doom. And from this little germ, an extraordinary little film, very powerful, very unexplicit, very poetic, David and Janet Peoples had developed a much more elaborate fiction, which has the same central idea of a man who is projected back into the past to warn against future danger, if he can get to the bottom of a plot, a terrorist plot, as it were, a bioethics plot, which is going to destroy humanity. According to Terry Gilliam, when I talked to him about it, the script had gone through many modifications. It had been round and round in circles. At one point, they'd tried to get Chris Marker involved, and he'd said, I don't want to have anything to do with it. You've started from my film. That's fine. If you can't put it on one sheet of paper, don't bother me. So, as you might imagine, Chris Marker was not very interested in the elaboration of essentially a narrative film. So he was out of the picture. But I think Terry felt a strong obligation to consult with the Peoples about what form their script was going to take and how to bring it to the screen, because it had been looking for a director for some time. And Charles Roven, was that director with whom Terry Gilliam had a good relationship. So Chuck Roven persuaded him to take it on, gave him the script, he liked it, he met the script writers, and then the problem became one of casting. And this is, I think, what's really interesting about the film. This is one of the things that makes it not a normal film, not a conventional film by any means, because it contains two terrific pieces of casting against type. One of those was Bruce Willis, obviously. Terry, I think, was very impressed by a side of Bruce Willis which had not really been seen very much. And he talked to me about a little scene in Die Hard where Bruce Willis is taking glass out of his feet. And he's on the phone to his wife, and there are tears in his eyes. And when Bruce Willis told him that that was something that he had brought to the part, it wasn't in the script, Terry thought, that's it. That's exactly what I'm after. I'm after somebody who can create that sort of sense of vulnerability. Because when you think about it, the actual role that Willis plays in the film, he's on the run, visibly injured, and not in a heroic way, throughout most of the film. I mean, it is the most anti-heroic image that you can imagine. He's a battered man who is doggedly trying to convince people around him that he's not mad and that he has a message from the future for them. It's a difficult, rather extraordinary role, and I think Willis does it terrifically. The other piece of casting which was against type was Brad Pitt.
We're not productive anymore, at least to make things anymore. It's all automated. What are we for then? We're consumers, Jim. Okay, buy a lot of stuff. You're a good citizen. But if you don't buy a lot of stuff, if you don't, what are you then, I ask you? What? Mentally ill. Back, Jim, back. If you don't buy things, toilet paper, new cars, computerized blenders, electrically operated sexual devices, stereo systems with brain-implanted headphones, screwdrivers, miniature built-in radar devices, voice-activated computers.
Take it easy, Jeffrey. Be calm.
Terry tells the story of how Brad Pitt was interested in the part and had wanted to prove that he could do it. And he came and said, I can do it, I can do it. But there's an interesting episode where he was sent to work with a voice coach, and the voice coach said, it's not going to work. He doesn't really have the vocal equipment to handle this extraordinary manner of speaking. But Brad Pitt was so determined to do it that he convinced Terry that he would work at it and could do it, and he does. I mean, the Brad Pitt's vocal performance, well, his whole performance in the film is absolutely extraordinary. We've never seen anything like it from him before, or I suspect since. It's a real triumph of pulling off this guy who is essentially mad, but is kind of controlled, very controlled, mostly, and is keeping a lid on this seething mass of emotions and this very, very dangerous personality. And I think these two performances really are what the film rests on. And Madeleine Stowe, of course, who is terrific also. I think Terry was rather disappointed when the previews of the film showed that in the very first version, which they previewed, audiences didn't really buy the romance. They thought, this is a bit difficult to believe, given what's led up to it, given the capture involved, given the state they're both in. Are we really going to take this romance seriously? And apparently they adjusted the music. I don't know exactly how, but they adjusted the music to try to reinforce the plausibility of the romance.
I want to become a whole person again. I want this to be the present. I want to stay here, this time, with you.
So again, it's something kind of unusual for Terry Gilliam in his career to, go through the whole Hollywood procedure of proper testing in front of an audience and making adjustments on the film. That, I think, was really valuable for him because he was somebody who had come to film production essentially from television. That was what his initial experience was. And right from the early days of Python making films, he wants to be a real film director. And I found when I was doing the interview book with him, Gilliam on Gilliam, that we had long and interesting discussions, some of which are in the book and some aren't, about technique and about what the importance of technique and how you need technique to get over difficult and ambitious ideas. And we didn't just talk about Terry's own films, but his observations on many other directors' work. He was really learning in a very deep and serious way how to be a very versatile Hollywood director. And I think we can see this film, 12 Monkeys, as an important chapter in that, which has made possible the things that he's done subsequently. The most amusing thing I discovered talking to him about the film was that although it's set in Philadelphia and Baltimore, the scriptwriters had never actually been to either city. They'd just chosen those as places, abstractly, where it should take place. And so Terry and the crew arrive in Philadelphia and realize that there's nothing given in the script. They have to invent what's going to happen on the ground. And one of the things that he told me worked really well was that the mayor of Philadelphia at the time was really interested in film and felt it would be good if the city appeared on screen, and was extremely helpful. So they really had a run of the architecture, the wonderful architecture of Philadelphia, and the great sort of historic buildings. They used all of those, which was very helpful given that the budget was quite tight. It's an interesting film, I think, in his career, because he became very involved in the process of setting it up, very engaged in the very elaborate, sort of almost metaphysical quality of the film. This is the film that's playing with realities. It's asking us to believe in time travel, in the possibility of biological disaster, in terrorism. It's an important contribution to modern terrorism films, an extraordinary vision of the possibilities that we haven't really seen explored very fully on screen. It's got some wonderful performances in it, and what I think is typical of Terry Gilliam's work is it's full of a feeling of the grain and the texture and the stuff of things. Going back to the film, I'm struck by it being a film of textures and feels and objects, and most of these are found objects. In many cases he's working with what he's found, and he decides to incorporate it. But he really wants it not to be a smooth, airbrushed, futuristic film, because of course it's not set in the future, it's set in the present, our present, but viewed from a future. And so that it's in the realms of science fiction, if we want to place it in that genre, it belongs to that very special area of science fiction where the more we believe in the reality of its setting, the concreteness of its setting, the more the science fiction works, given what the actual structure of the film is. There were problems with the studio. There weren't problems with the studio interfering with the film. The problem was that they were running short of money because of Waterworld. Looking back on it from where we are now, it's rather amusing to think that Waterworld was sinking the studio at the same time that 12 Monkeys was being made, and there was no extra money. In fact, they were being asked to cut corners to keep Waterworld afloat. The film came out, and it was released at Christmas, or just at the end of December in '95, against Clockers on the one hand and Casino. And they had been eating up each other's audiences, as it were. There was an issue about how well was it going to do. It actually did very well indeed. And the sad irony is that, having delivered a film on time, on budget, which performed very well at the box office, Terry took his project, The Defective Detective, back and said, well, maybe it's time to think about that. And they said, no. The reason 12 Monkeys did so well was because of Brad. And I think he was mortified to be told that really what he had delivered was, in effect, a kind of star vehicle. Granted, the stars were playing very much against their conventional image, but from the studio's point of view, that was what had made the film a success, and maybe they're right. Certainly it's a really interesting film in the Gilliam canon, I think, and even if the reasons for taking it on were to show that he could do it, I think there's a lot of his own interests actually in the film. I mean, like all great directors, he found things in it that really spoke to him. And there are so many moments in the film, so many themes in the film, so much photographic texture in the film that you really feel it's his own. I mean, if it had been his project, I don't think he would have made it any better or any different. He hadn't seen La Jetée at the time he made the film. People always ask him, you know, and had you seen La Jetée? How did you feel about remaking it in this extended narrative form? But of course, very wisely, he hadn't seen it. He knew about it, and I remember him telling me that he was going to see it after he'd finished 12 Monkeys. What he thought about it, I've never asked him, but I'm sure he found it very interesting to catch up with La Jetée after the event.